Hello everyone. Today we are going to cover the contact force and it is the part of our chapter called force and pressure. So today we are going to discuss about the contact force. So in last class we discussed about the non-contact force. There we discussed about three major types. One is called gravitational force, other is called magnetic force, and last but not the least is called electrostatic force. These are the non-contact force that we discussed already in last class. So in today's class we are going to cover the contact force. Okay, suppose if you want to push that object, suppose here we have any object, and if you are applying force with direct contact with that object, then it is called as the contact force. Okay, let's discuss here. Contact force that act on the object by the direct or indirect physical contact are called as contact force. Okay, there is contact must be important. It may be direct or it may be indirect. Applied force and friction are the example of the contact force. The applied force on any object. Okay, suppose you here we have one object and here you are applying force on that object, so it is the direct contact. Okay, and what is friction? We discussed in last class only. When suppose we are throwing the ball on the surface of the ground, and if it is rolling some distance, okay, so there is, and after rolling or traveling some distance it stops. Why it stops? Because between the ball and earth surface there is a friction force acting between them. So that friction force is acting due to the direct contact of object and the surface. So it is again the contact force. Now, first we are going to understand about the applied force. The applied force that we apply with our hand or legs or finger, etc., are collectively called as applied force. We used to call that applied force. When we tie a stone to the string and suspend it, okay, the tension, so it, see what happens. Suppose here we have the stone, we have tied with the string, okay, and if you are holding that string and you are pulling towards that, okay, in this direction, that means you are not applying force on the stone directly, but you are applying force on that string, and string is applying force on that object. Okay, so it is indirect force applying on the stone. Okay, in the string possess the force of gravity on the earth and keeps the stone from falling down. Okay, suppose if you are rolling that object towards it in this particular direction, okay, so here we have the gravitational force working between earth surface and that particular object. But still, if you can like push or pull that object by with the help of string, then it is the indirect force applying on the object. When we do work with our hands, such as lifting a weight or the pulling the object, so here we are pulling the object, okay, the force required to provide that by the tension of our muscles, okay. So in order to walk, in order to apply force or to push any object, we used to apply the muscles force with direct contact or indirect contact, like in example we already gone through that. When we need to apply a force, a brain sends a signal to the muscle. Okay, suppose if you want to speak, if you want to write, okay, if you want to walk, if you want to apply the force, your brain is sending signal to the muscles and muscle acts accordingly to apply the force on an object in the form of electrical signal via the nerve cells. Okay, so whatever the signal, they are sent by the brain, okay, to the muscles. Okay, here we have the brain and these are the nerve cells, and here we have the muscles by which our muscles act accordingly. Okay, which makes the muscle contract and relax. Contract and relax. So during applying force, contract, and we are not applying, then muscles again relax back. This is how we can apply the force with our hands and legs on any object in order to pull or push the object. So this is all about the applied force. We are applying the force on the object with our legs or any parts of the body. Okay, now we are going to discuss about the friction. It is again very important. Friction is the force that offers the resistance when two surfaces are in contact with each other or they move in contact to other surface. Okay, try to move with respect to each other. Suppose in earlier example, here we have already gone through that. So here we have the surface. This is the surface of Earth. And here we have the rolling ball. Okay, it is rolling in this particular direction. So in that particular region, friction is working. Here friction is working. This is the ball. Okay, and here we have the earth surface. So when ball is rolling on the earth surface, friction is working between them. Okay, the force of friction comes into play only when two surfaces are in direct physical contact with each other. So that friction force will always work there only when two or more objects are direct contact with each other. When and is therefore a contact force. Hence, that friction force is called as contact force. Contact force. Okay. Now we have to understand what are the factors that can affect the friction force. So next point we have factors that affect the friction force. Okay. Number one, mass of the object. Mass of the object. So mass of an object is directly proportional to the friction force. If mass is more, friction will be the more. Okay. So when heavier object and the greater will be the friction force. See, mass is directly proportional to the friction force. That means more mass, more will be the friction. Second, the nature of the surface of the contact. If there is a smooth surface, okay, smooth. Okay, the smooth surface, then friction will be less friction. That's why on smooth surface people used to slip. But if the surface is like very rough, okay, then friction will be more. Okay, if surface is rough, then friction will be more. Okay, so roughness of, I'm writing here, roughness of the surface is directly proportional to the friction. More rough, more will be the friction. Less rough, less will be the friction. Very simple it is. In general, rough surface will offer a greater friction force than the smooth surface. It is very important. These are the two factors that affect the friction force. Now we are going to understand about the static friction and kinetic friction. These are the types of friction. Very important. Okay. So now we are going to understand the static friction and the kinetic friction. Okay. See, in addition to the mass and nature of the surface in contact, the force of friction between two surfaces also depend on whether the surfaces are moving with respect to each other or not. Means they are stationary or they are in motion. The force of friction that holds the stationary object from slipping is called as static friction. Okay, that means suppose here we have any surface and here we have the object and the friction force is working between them to remain that object in static position only, then it is called as static friction. Static means it is not going to move. It is not going to move. That's why it is called as static friction. For example, you can stand without slipping on a slope because of the static friction. Okay, if suppose you are walking on the slope street and if you are not falling down, okay, that means you are having static friction between a surface and your sole or shoes. That makes you stand there only. Okay, so your shoes and surface of the slope, okay, there is a static friction working. That's why you don't slip on the surface. You can't slip. Okay, now next, the force of friction that slows down already the moving object. Okay, in case of the rolling ball, okay, if suppose here we have the surface and if ball is rolling here, okay, and after some time that ball will reach to or travel to the certain distance, and after that it will become it will stop moving. That means that force, okay, acting between the object, which force, the friction force, will reduce the speed of that object. That friction is called as moving friction or kinetic friction. Okay, the force of friction that slows down the already moving object and eventually bring it to the stop. Okay, that is called as kinetic friction. For example, if you slide a book on your table and leave it, it will slow down and come to the stop, or will move and after some time will stop. Okay, by like traveling some distance it will stop. So it is due to the kinetic friction working between them. So kinetic friction slows down the speed of moving object. You will learn later that static friction is always the larger than kinetic friction. Okay, because suppose if we had two objects, one object of same mass, suppose it is 5 kg and it is on stationary, and one again 5 kg object and but which is in motion condition. So if you will apply same force on that, okay, that object which is already in motion, okay, will be move faster as compared to the stationary object. That means stationary friction, I am writing here, stationary friction's value or magnitude, stationary friction, its magnitude will always greater than kinetic friction. KT friction. KT is kinetic friction and ST is stationary friction. Okay, so kinetic friction is always greater than, no, static friction is always greater than kinetic friction. Very important that you have to remember. Okay, next point. Now we are going to understand about the cause of friction. Friction is a very complex phenomenon and there is a lot about it that still need to be explained. Two simple explanations for why friction is caused are as follows. So number one, very important that we have to understand the example by which we can understand both kinetic as well as static friction. Any surface, however smooth, has a lot of irregularities and seen under the microscope. Okay, means any surface, if you observe under the microscope, there will be irregularity. Means it is not smooth, but the smoothness is very like that roughness is very less. Okay, these irregularities are like hills and valleys. When two such surfaces slide over each other, will be able to resist the motion. Okay, if any object, okay, suppose here we have one object, here we have another object, they are in contact with each other. If we will roll them or one over other, okay, so will causes the friction. Okay, so by again we have next example. Another theory that explains the friction is that when two objects comes in contact, their atoms and molecules pulls each other. Okay, so like suppose here we have one object and here we have another object. So when they comes in contact with each other, so atoms of this like object, they pulls each other. They pulls towards each other due to electrostatic force of attraction working between them. Why? Due to electrostatic force of attraction working between them. Hence, they stick to each other at a microscopic level. Okay, they stick together at a microscopic level, and when we slide over each other, okay, and when we try to slide on the surface with respect to each other, this after they offer the resistance to motion, because this atom will again going to like acting on each other friction. Okay, they are going to act friction on each other, and their like motion will again slows down. So this is all about the static and kinetic friction. Okay, now it is question times.